Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I am so excited to be here today with Maria Gabriela Brito, who is a Venezuelan-born curator, art advisor, and author. And she most recently is the author of How Creativity Rules the World, the art and business of turning your ideas into gold. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Will, and I'm so happy to be here. Funny thing, you are the first person who have called me by my two names in maybe 5 years, because it's a very South American thing when, your parents give you all these names. I'm not sure that must be a reminiscent thing from like the colony and, the Europeans and whatnot, that they always have like 20 names. But most people know me as Maria Brito. So thank you for reminding me that I had such a long name.
Well, it's so beautiful to say, the Maria Gabriela, right? The whole thing. My and as I mentioned before we started, my wife is Peruana, so we like to get to Latin America at least once a year, and it's. But I won't try to do this episode in Spanish. So let's before we get into talking about your book, and I want to get to that. You were graduated from Harvard Law School and then
Yes.
had a journey to become an art advisor, which is not the typical career path of Harvard Law School graduates. Tell us a little bit about that journey, about Harvard Law School to becoming an art advisor. And there's a lot to explore with that practice.
Well, listen, you said it. I was born and raised in Venezuela in a conservative family, and when you are in that environment, usually you don't really have a lot of choices with your career because your parents have the mission to brainwash you and say, well, in this house, you are going to be a doctor, an attorney, or an engineer. Something that they used to call it dependable and safe and prestigious, and avoiding at all costs, God forbid, having a child who was going to starve because she was going to go to art school or fashion design or it was a different world, but also contextually, my parents didn't have the perspective and the opportunities that I've had. And also, Venezuela has absolutely nothing to do with the United States, right? I mean, it's like completely different. But the point is that I ended up going to law school and I went to Harvard Law and I graduated and moved to New York to work in law firms, in corporate law firms or corporate departments of big law firms, medium law firms. I work in a variety of law firms because I was always thinking the next one was going to be the best one because I couldn't really figure out why I was so miserable to begin with in the first one. And then in the second one, I was equally miserable. And the third one, it was like, okay, it's not really me. It's not the law firm. It's like how I actually am not meant to do this and I don't match this environment. And this is absolutely, it's killing my soul. I dread it. And I was a good lawyer because honestly, you execute things on time, you are resourceful, you do what you're meant to do, you show up to your calls, you work, 16 hours a day. So it's not really rocket science once you've gone through all the hurdles of, getting your degree, passing the bar, and being an efficient and reliable member of your department. But I just simply hated it. I had absolutely no desire to be there to serve the clients. I mean, nothing. And so I I said, to myself, look, at that time I was 31 or something, and I had just gotten pregnant, and I had already been pondering my exit strategy for a long time. And at the beginning, you take this like little fantasies and say, well, what is it that I'm going to do, right? I mean, am I going to open a brick and mortar business? Am I going to go and raise capital? Uh, am I going to start something from my, living room? What is it that I'm going to do? And this was a lot of, soul searching. And, I said, I'm going to just come clean with myself because the truth is, I don't like this corporate America thing. I don't like the structure. I don't really feel that I am utilizing my talents and gifts. And I've always had this passion for the visual arts. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And the art market is also incredible. People have so much fear. Even billionaires are so intimidated by the art market and what happens in auction houses, in galleries, and it seems so obscure and impenetrable. And I'm talking about 14 years ago, right? When I was thinking about these topics, it's a very different world right now. And I said to myself, I'm not going to be the parent who's going to model after, like to my child that I hate my job, that I'm never around because attorneys really have no time off. And but it's not only that. I mean, if you were to have no time off, but you absolutely love what you're doing, is a very different proposition that you absolutely hate what you're doing and you have no time off. So after my child was born, I went back to the law firm for about 3 months, and then I quit. And I had already written a business plan for the business, the advisory, that it's what it is today. I mean, obviously it has gone through a lot of different iterations because that's what entrepreneurs do. You change a lot because you need to adapt to the times, and that's part of being creative, is to be relevant for the moment that you're living. And I started my business with a website. I hired a person who helped me with communications and a little bit of PR at the very beginning. And that's how I started the business. And, as I said before, it's been the best 13 years of my life. The business is a seven-figure business with a very, very small overhead. And I just feel incredibly privileged that I was able to actually quit my job, open a business, build it from scratch, build a brand, become an industry leader, and being able also to expand in different areas as I've had, because it's not only the art advisory, but I also have a consulting part of the business that works with companies on innovation and creativity, because I have been surrounded by the most extraordinary contemporary artists in the world, more than 450 that I've had the opportunity to work with. But I've also had these incredible clients who hired me not only to build their art collections, but they were so fascinated by my story that they would hire me as as a speaker or as a workshop facilitator in their company, so that I could talk to their employees about seeing things from a different perspective and coming up with solutions that they never had thought about before. And so that is what gave me the impetus to open an online course about creativity for people who wanted to enroll online. And that is also how the book came to be, because the people who enrolled in the course had such massive breakthroughs that I thought to myself, if they are having these breakthroughs, why is it that I cannot bring this to, instead of having 500 people who can take the course, let's bring it to 100,000 people who can actually buy the book or whatever it is, right? So I feel incredibly passionate about what I've built, and I think that we are in a very crucial time where a lot of people we're going through the great resignation. A lot of people are quitting their jobs because they are not satisfied or fulfilled. They think that there's a better way to do things. They also want to shift careers or finally be their own bosses and things like that. And this is the right time to do it, for sure.
So let's talk about your art advisory business. So you've developed a very impressive set of clientele, which includes Sean Combs and Gwyneth Paltrow and Tracy Anderson. Tell us, what is the service that you provide as an art advisor? So, I mean, from just the term of it, I imagine you help people build their collection. But how does that work? What what are the pieces of that?
Well, art, contemporary art or modern art, I specialize mostly in contemporary, but the contemporary art is an asset like any other, right? And so it is an investment. It's a way to diversify wealth and portfolios. And not everybody has to be really wealthy, like Puff Daddy or Gwyneth. People actually start collections sometimes with like, $5,000, and that's how they start. And it's the art market is a 300 billion global business that has many moving parts, and that includes galleries, auction houses, online websites where you can actually buy art, art fairs that have proliferated at a neck-breaking pace, and so there are many different things that happen in the art world that have made it very, very extensive. So I am the eyes and ears of my clients in regards to what to buy, when to buy, what makes sense in their collections, because people actually live with the art in on their walls, even though once they've gotten the bug of collecting, they have storages, they rotate the collections, they put things away. Perhaps they want to sell something. Somebody else may contact me and say, I have this, art piece or this specific part of my collection that I really do not feel connected to anymore. Or, I need the money, whatever. And so these transactions usually are different from anything else that you've known, because people have a lot of emotional attachments to something like their art and the things that they have acquired, because they are meaningful to them. So they represent something that moves them. And collecting art is something that started 600 years ago with the Medici and the Renaissance. And the Medicis were the one who paid for the careers of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli and things like that, right? And so those patrons of the arts still exist today, but they have different names. And they are, a lot of them live in the United States, and they are generous, and they also utilize their art collections as collateral to borrow money. They also use their art collections to lend to museums so that people can actually enjoy the art at a different level. That some of them actually open their own museums and foundations, because they have already accumulated so much art. It's just necessary for them as a matter of fact to open up what they have to the world. So that's kind of in a nutshell what an like an art advisor does. And it's a very, very dynamic job, because now there are also this whole story of the NFTs. And additionally, there are, for example, in New York City alone, there are more than 1,000 galleries. And the art market in the past 5 years has been fueled by Instagram, by people having a knowledge of art that they didn't have before. And obviously, people who invested early on in cryptocurrencies now have enormous amount of wealth that they can utilize also to acquire art in many different ways. I mean, it could be NFTs, but it could also be that, they exchange their crypto and they buy art with, US dollars or euros or whatever. So it's a lot of fun, but for the layman, it's usually a very complicated thing, because since it is so big and it expanded and grew so much, people don't know where to start. People don't know where to put their money. People are afraid of making mistakes. And because again, it's a full-time job for me. So if like people just want to dabble into it a little bit, they can, but it's not necessarily going to be a well thought out process if they do not dedicate themselves to the research. And the building of the relationships with the art dealers is very important too.
So let's
It's like a lot of building relationships.
Yeah. So let's set aside NFTs for a minute, and let's say someone wants to buy some physical art, and you know, perhaps they have somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000 to think about getting started in collecting. And what would your guidance be to someone who wants to get started, is curious about art but really doesn't know a lot about it. How do you start? How would you recommend researching? Starting knowledgeable of the world, and how do you think about buying your first pieces of art? Is it important to, for example, you know, beyond just sort of just picking something that you personally like to look at? How should someone get smart in terms of knowing about the artist or knowing where to buy it, etc.?
Well, I can think about two ways. The first one is that because of the pandemic, art fairs, which are the most extraordinary place to see all the works under one roof, right? Because art fairs are, places where galleries from all over the world gather under one roof, and then you can spend the whole day looking at the offerings that each one of them has in their booths. But because of the pandemic, every art fair now also has an online component where people can actually browse the art that those galleries are selling, no matter where those people are located in the world, right? So that is already giving people an enormous advantage that it didn't exist before the pandemic, to look at the art from either some of the best galleries in the world, if they were to be looking at Art Basel online, or that are very interesting, young and fun emerging emerging art fairs, that's where the new talent is found, and that's where people with a budget of 5,000 to 20,000 can actually start getting an education of what it's being shown, right? And so that requires time, but at the time is just logging in your computer, going to the website of art fairs, like, for example, the Future Art Fair or Spring Break Art Fair or Untitled Art Fair. So they have physical moments when they actually happen for 5 or 6 days in New York or in LA or in Miami, and then the websites run for about 2 weeks, 10 days, or even more. In certain cases, they have websites with offerings of the art that was shown in that fair for 4 months. And that is an extraordinary way for people to actually understand what are the price ranges, what is the aesthetic of the moment, what is happening, what is resonating with them. Do you want to look at the different mediums? Is it a painting? Is it a work on paper? Is it a collage? Do you want a sculpture? So there has really never been so much access at people's fingertips ever in regards to the art market. And the second way I recommend is that, depending on where, look, in the United States has also grown so much in terms of galleries, right? That almost every city has an art gallery or two. And I think that's an excellent way for people to start getting their toes wet, because they can support the local galleries, understand what the programming is, and form a criteria by being there in person and seeing what it is. And it might not be the best, but you can also have a criteria by determining that that's not where you want to spend your money and that you think there is something better. And so that's why the online, art fairs are so important for people, because after a certain amount of research, you can start having an idea of what you want. And I think that's a great way for people to start.
Now, you mentioned that this is a full-time activity for you, and there's just in New York City, there's 1,000 galleries. Talk to me about kind of your time allocation, a typical week. Are you out there kind of visiting multiple galleries, talking on the phone with gallery owners or artists, or like what specific, online publications do you read and follow? So talk to me about kind of how you spend your time staying current with what's going on in the art world.
Yeah, I allocate time to go to galleries in person in New York City. Any given week, I may give, 2 or 3 hours, because they are concentrated in neighborhoods. So if you go to Tribeca, you can see 10 galleries in 45 minutes, let's say. If you go to Chelsea, you can see 200 galleries in 2 hours, because they are all next to each other. And also, I don't go to everything. I mean, I actually my own curator and editor. I need to choose what I want to see. So between 3 and 4 hours a week is like physical in-person visits. I also go to museums because a lot of these artists are young artists even are having museum shows, or they are included in certain group shows and things like that. So I want to make sure that I'm seeing and I'm aware of that. I've also found young artists who've gotten museum exposure before they actually got representation from a gallery, because certain museums take risks and chances on things like that, especially uh, more recently. They want to diversify who they're showing and why. And so that is part of, the physical going places. Since I've been in this business for so long, I get previews online, and meaning I get all these emails with PDFs or websites where you click and you enter into what they call the online viewing room with the offerings of a particular show. And the previews are usually sent to our collectors and art advisors a few days before a show opens, because the demand is so high in relationship to the supply. Usually good shows are sold out before it even opens to the public, and same thing happens with art fairs. Not every, but there is a lot of interest and a lot of people who are buying art, particularly the young hot artists, because people feel that they can bet on something that they love, and it's only $5,000 or $10,000. For somebody who has a collection with 2,000 paintings and has a budget of 3 million bucks a year, that's really nothing. And so what happens is that a lot of people are just getting started and competing with those people too. And this is not to discourage people, but it's to actually set out the context of how it is right now. It was not like this when I started. It was even not like this 5 years ago, but it has really gotten enormously big in the past five, and intensified in the past 3. So I spend a lot of time, reviewing those previews, because usually the sales with my clients who already know what they're doing is through JPEGs and PDFs that get circulated me directly to my clients via email or WhatsApp or text. And I said, I love this artist. I think it fits in your collection. Price is right. This is the picture. This is what's available. I need to know in the next, 3, 4, 5 hours before everything is gone. So that's the time spent, selling and going through these previews is also substantial. I mean, it depends. There are weeks where things are intensified. If there is an art fair, for example, happening, the galleries have both a presence in the art fair and a show happening, or 2 or 3, because a lot of these galleries have, Gagosian has 20 galleries around the world, and 4 of them in New York City. So they have all sorts of activities happening all the time. And so about 5 hours or so are spent going through all these emails and choosing what to offer to my clients. And I read ArtNet. ArtNet is the best online publication for people who want to understand what's happening in the art world. They have a daily newsletter that has the latest of the art world, and interviews with artists, interview with art dealers, movements in the market, headlines of the auction houses, and things like that. And so, um, that's kind of like my time allocation. And there is also phone negotiations. I also visit artists in their studios, because that is a very, and for a long time it has been a very important part of my practice, is to make sure that I also understand these artists, not just from the standpoint of what's written on a PDF or what's written on a website or what I have seen in a gallery, but I also want to hear from them, what they do, how they think, who they are. And that is it has been one of the most rewarding things. I've been doing that for the past 13 years, and it truly is one of those things that opens up your mind into so many different possibilities. And it's a great thing to be able to see their careers unfold, because I mean, there is like these artists are so amazingly excellent since they graduate from their MFAs or from their undergrads, and they are so ambitious too. So it's an incredible time to watch this people get successful.
If you don't mind my asking, what's the typical, how do you fee structure for an art advisor? Is it sort of a percent of the annual budget that they spend on the art, or is it like an hourly fee, or how do you typically structure that?
For the most part, it's a percentage of the acquisitions, and it that number varies. It could be 10%, it could be 12%, and it all depends on the client, the amount of work that the client acquires annually, and the size of the transactions, right? Because sometimes if you're negotiating something that is $1 million, for example, you are, I mean, for the most part, a lot of dealers and a lot of art advisors are willing to lower their 10% so that the transaction happens, everybody's happy, and the clients keep coming back, right? There are also deals that are usually being co-brokered because somebody may use an art advisor to communicate with another art advisor, almost like a real estate broker, except these things are not publicized in a website. So I may get a phone call from the art advisor of a different collector, and that person says, we have this piece of art that we are, so it's called the acquisitions when you sell things from your collection. And person may say, we're de-acquiring this. Do you have a client? And usually the way that is structured is that the fee gets split in half, right, between the art advisor from the other side and me, and obviously the sale price goes directly to the owner. So that's kind of it is. That's the way it's mostly in this business. I used to take retainers based on hourly rates at the beginning of my business, but it's just not necessarily something I do anymore because I'm working with people for so long, and new clients also, since now everything really is done online, I can sense from the very beginning if they are going to be serious or if they just like trying to get information and not move forward. So I try to be strategic in the sense that I can offer them things that, and then I realize if they are incredibly difficult to work with because they can't make decisions or because they are just hesitant, or because then I just don't offer them anything anymore. I don't work with them. I don't like to waste my time. I always try to be courteous and gracious and give people a little bit. And I get a lot of people through referrals too. So I know when I have a client who's referred me like 10 clients who all of them are people in the financial industry, and all of them think fast, make decisions fast. And so I already sort of know where the client is coming from and what they want, and if it's going to be a good fit for me or not.
That's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about your book. So book is titled How Creativity Rules the World, The Art and Business of Turning Your Ideas into Gold. What are some of the key messages that you want readers of that book to leave with?
Yeah, I think that creativity is the most important skill that people can have right now, and actually at any time. But if you've seen the statistics, LinkedIn has scanned the data that has been shared in the network by more than 100 million professionals, and the number one skill that is being required for people who are looking to hire is creativity. But it is also the skill that the employers consider is the hardest to find. And it's also the World Economic Forum named it last year the number one skill that is going to future-proof any job. And, it's not only for people who are employed, obviously, but for people who want their practices, their consulting businesses, and their careers, and their whatever it is that they are doing to succeed. And here's why: without ideas, there's no progress. And without differentiating yourself from the multitude of people who are doing the same that you're doing, it's going to be very difficult to survive long term, right? I mean, of course, people have to know their craft, people have to know their businesses, people have, there are a ton of listen, marketing, for example, is a creative skill. And if you don't really know how to market yourself, it's going to be hard. It really is going to be hard. And if you don't know how to, what kind of words use to express the core of your business and what you do, it's also going to be hard. So I believe that I didn't just write this book because it was the time to do it, but because I have experienced myself all these different skills and habits and attitudes in my own business, which, coming from a former corporate attorney into what I have turned myself now, wasn't necessarily something easy, but I decided that I wanted to make it work. And I have interviewed and worked with a variety of different people, including 450 artists, but I've also had the opportunity to talk to scientists and business professors and researchers and psychologists. And I gathered an enormous amount of information around creativity. And one of the things that people trip up the most is thinking that creativity is a God-given, like gift or a skill that only a handful of very chosen, people have. And that's not true. I mean, creativity is an amalgamation of skills that include, risk taking and autonomy, authenticity, the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to have, critical thinking. And once you put all these things together, then you can say you are creative. And the second thing that is very important is that, creativity is simply your ability to come up with ideas of value that are relevant for your business right now, right? And since we are so different, all of us, and have had different educations, different backgrounds, born in different places, learned different skills, it's hard for me to believe that people can't be creative with all the different experiences that they have accumulated throughout their lives. And that's what I'm set out to do with this book. If you can't think differently, and if you cannot see things from a different vantage point, it's hard to outshine, the competitors. It's actually hard to be noticed. It's hard to, we don't want people who survive. We want people who can thrive in their professions. And that's pretty much what I am looking to give to the readers who, get this book. Is this blueprint, and it's things are simple, but that doesn't mean they're easy, because it's all about the work that people put into developing the skills daily. So you can read the book and that's fine. It will entertain you for, whatever time you spend reading it. But the actual execution is what actually will give you the breakthroughs. And, simplicity is my motto, because complexity it kills execution, right? It's the enemy of execution. And I liked the book. It's not that the book is simple, but actually I like the idea of giving people simple steps that can compound and actually manifest in all these incredible ideas that can be materialized. So the book is highly actionable, and at the end of each chapter, there is a series of questions and exercises for people to actually sharpen their creative thinking skills and to take a chance on themselves daily. Right. And that's what I want to do.
Great. Yep. So let me ask you about that. So let's say a listener of this show right now considers herself reasonably creative person, but would like to be even more creative. Share one or two of those exercises from your book of things that you could do today to build that creativity muscle.
One thing is, you have to kind of surprise your brain sometimes. One thing I'd like to do at times is to write with my non-dominant hand and to jot thoughts. I mean, you're not going to spend, 2 hours trying to do something with non-dominant hand, but you have to jot your brain in different ways than what you normally do. And by the same token, for example, a lot of people have already created routines. Routines actually are incredibly important. But what if you take a different route to work today? What if you, go and take this phone call or just go with your computer to a different coffee shop and answer your emails from there, because the point of generating new ideas will never come from doing what you do every day. You will have to actually immerse yourself in a variety of different environments and look at things from a different vantage point. I was reading an article and I was watching this Nobel Prize winner, a doctor who won I think in 2010 in physiology, and they asked him, how do you actually innovate? How do you actually disrupt your field? Because the reason why he won the Nobel Prize, because he found some stem cells and I don't know what, very, I have no idea exactly how to explain it, but what I actually was looking is for the answer. And he said, I keep myself always reading and watching things that have nothing to do with my own field, because that's how my mind opens up. I hate to say, but if you read every trade magazine and you follow everything that's happening in your industry, that's not where you're going to find the answers that are going to create breakthroughs, because otherwise everybody will be doing it, right? I mean, it's like, oh my God, you go to every conference and you are super specialized and you've done this thing and you're so good at it. You start developing a lot of blind spots because you're so good at it, you get comfortable. And so I encourage people to try, if you only read a certain type of website news, go to the one that is completely opposite, right? If you only watch sports on TV, go and get a film, a foreign indie film and spend, 2 hours getting to see all the things. And people will consider this to be like so easy, but it's actually miraculous for creativity, because a lot of the ideas that you're forming and the information that you are absorbing gets stored in your subconscious, and it comes out in ways that you don't even understand. How did that happen?
So that kind of reminds me of the idea that Julia Cameron has of having an artist date with yourself on some regular basis, where you schedule time to invite serendipity. And it doesn't mean going to necessarily a museum. It could just mean walking on a different block than you normally do, or visiting a store that inspires you, maybe a vintage clothing store, or just even kind of reading a book that would be outside your normal practice. Love those
Definitely.
ideas. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like some of the many ways that people can prompt their creative minds, but it's all about building blocks. It's a lot about, and I make sure that in the book I mentioned every study that backs up each one of my points, because I know that a lot of people won't believe if there is no data. And I actually wanted to give people the data of why each one of these skills and habits are so very important for their creative minds.
So, Maria, for people that want to follow up and find out more about your work, we will, of course, include a link to your book in the show notes. Where else would you point them online if you want to give a website or other social media address? Well, where would you point people?
Yes, my website is mariabrito.com. That's B as in boy, R as in rose, I as in island, T as in Tom, O. And that's where you're going to find me. I mean, all the links to my social media, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And so you can actually find me in those places. And there is also a form that you can fill in if you want to get in touch with me and send me an email. That's very easy. It's all under that roof of mariabrito.com. And, the book is How Creativity Rules the World, and it's available everywhere where books are sold, right? I mean, like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and IndieBound, Books A Million, and your independent bookstores. It's published by HarperCollins, and I'm excited to bring this to the world.
Congratulations on the publication of your book, and we will include the link to your website in the show notes. Maria Gabriela Brito, thank you for joining today. This is a great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Will, for having me. It's my pleasure and my privilege to be here with you.